boys and girls. Guess where I am? Yes, I'm in our classroom. I had to come up here for a few things to get ready for next week, and I thought what a better place to do our next read aloud of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but in our class home. Just know that I'm missing you being up here. I can still hear our conversations and our laughters and everything that made us a class family, and it's just not the same without you being present with me as I'm reading. But I thought maybe you would enjoy getting to see our room for just a little bit. So we're going to read two chapters today, chapter 25 and 26. Remember, we're getting closer to the end. Chapter 30 is the end of our story. And we left off where Veruca ended up going into the nut room. She wasn't supposed to, but she just couldn't help herself, and so she went in there. The squirrels ended up thinking she was a bad nut, and so she ended up going down the garbage chute. And the little Oompa Loompas ended up taking her off and singing their song. So let's see what else happens. We still have Mike TV and Charlie Bucket that's still going around the factory with Mr. Willy Wonka. Chapter 25, The Great Glass Elevator. "I've never seen anything like it," cried Mr. Wonka. "The children are disappearing like rabbits. You mustn't worry about it. They'll all come out in the wash." Mr. Wonka looked at the little group that stood beside him in the corridor. There were only two children left now, Mike TV and Charlie Bucket, and there were three grown-ups, Mr. and Mrs. TV and Grandpa Joe. "Shall we move on?" Mr. Wonka asked. "Oh, yes!" cried Charlie and Grandpa Joe both together. "My feet are getting tired," said Mike TV. "I want to watch television." "If you're tired, then we better take the elevator," said Mr. Wonka. "It's over here. Come on, in we go." He skipped across the passage to the pair of double doors. The door slid open. The two children and the grown-ups went inside. "Now then," cried Mr. Wonka, "which button shall we press first? Take your pick." Charlie Bucket stared around him in astonishment. This was the craziest elevator he had ever seen. There were buttons everywhere. The walls and even the ceilings were all covered with rows and rows and rows of small black push buttons. There must have been 1,000 of them on each wall and another 1,000 on the ceiling. And now Charlie noticed that every single button had a tiny printed label beside it telling which room you would be taken to if you pressed it. "This just isn't any ordinary up and down elevator," announced Mr. Wonka proudly. "This elevator can go sideways, long ways, slant ways, and any other way you can think of. It can visit in any single room in the whole factory, no matter where it is. You simply press the button and zing, you're off." "Fantastic," muttered Grandpa Joe. His eyes were shining with excitement as he stared at the rows and rows of buttons. "The whole elevator is made of thick, clear glass," said Mr. Wonka. "Walls, doors, ceilings, floors, everything made of glass, so that you can see out." "But there's nothing to see," said Mike TV. "Choose a button," said Mr. Wonka. "The two children may press one button each. So take your pick. Hurry up. In every room, something delicious and wonderful is being made." Quickly, Charlie started reading some of the labels alongside the buttons. "The Rock Candy Mine, 10,000 feet deep," it said on another one. "Coconut Ice Skating Rinks," it said on another. Then, "Strawberry Juice Water Pistols. Toffee apple trees for planting out in your garden, all sizes. Exploding candy for your enemies. Luscious lollies for eating in bed at night. Mint jubilees for the boy next door. They'll give him green teeth for a month. Cavity filling caramels. No more dentists. Stick jaw for talkative parents. Wiggle sweet that wiggle delightfully in your tummy after swallowing. Invisible chocolate bars for eating in class. Candy-coated pencils for sucking. Fizzy lemonade swimming pools. Magic hand fudge. When you hold it in your hand, you taste it in your mouth. Rainbow drops. Suck them and you can spit in 6 different colors. Come on, cried Mr. Wonka. We can't wait all day. Is Isn't there a television room in all of this?" asked Mike TV. "Certainly, there's a television room," said Mr. Wonka. "That button over there," and he pointed with his finger. Everybody looked. "Television chocolate," it said on the tiny label beside the button. "Whoopee!" shouted Mike TV. "That's for me." He stuck out his thumb and pressed the button. Instantly, there was a tremendous whizzing noise. The doors clanged shut, and the elevator leaped away as though it had been stung by a wasp. It leapt sideways, and all the passengers, except Mr. Wonka, who was holding onto a strap from the ceiling, were flung to their feet onto the floor. Get up, cried Mr. Wonka, roaring with laughter. But just as they were staggering to their feet, the elevator changed directions and swerved violently around a corner. And over they all went once more. "Help!" shouted Mike TV. "Take my hand, madam," said Mr. Wonka proudly. "There you are. Now grab this strap." Everybody grabbed a strap. The journey's not over yet. Grandpa Joe staggered to his feet and caught hold of the strap. Little Charlie, who couldn't possibly reach as high as that, put his arms around Grandpa Joe's legs and hung on tight. The elevator rushed at a speed of a rocket. Now it was beginning to climb. It was shooting up, and up on a steep, slanty course as if it was climbing a very steep hill. Then suddenly, as though it had come to the top of the hill and gone over another hill, it dropped like a stone, and Charlie felt his tummy coming right up into his throat. Grandpa Joe shouted, "Yippee! Here we go!" And Mike TV cried out, "The rope is broken, we're going to crash!" And Mr. Wonka said, "Calm yourself, my dear lady." And he patted her comfortingly on the arm. And then Grandpa Joe looked down at Charlie, who was clinging to his legs, and he said, "Are you all right, Charlie?" Charlie shouted, "I love it. It's like being on a roller coaster." And through the glass walls of the elevator, as it rushed along, they caught sudden glimpses of strange and wonderful things going on in some of the other rooms. An enormous spout with brown sticky stuff oozing out onto the floor. A great craggy mountain made of entirely of fudge with Oompa Loompas, all roped together for safety, hacking huge chunks of fudge out of its sides. A machine with white powder spraying out of it like a snowstorm. A lake of hot caramel with steam coming off of it. A village of Oompa Loompas with tiny houses and streets, and hundreds of Oompa Loompas children no more than 4 inches playing in the streets. And now the elevator began flattening out again, but it seemed to be going faster than ever, and Charlie could hear the scream of the wind outside as it hurled forward, and it twisted and it turned and went up and it went down, and "I'm going to be sick," said Mrs. TV, turning green in the face. "Oh, please don't be sick," said Mr. Wonka. "Try and stop me," said Miss TV. "Then you better take this," said Mr. Wonka, and he swept his magnificent black top hat off of his head and held it out upside down in front of Mrs. TV's mouth. "Make this awful thing stop," ordered Mr. TV. "Can't do that," said Mr. Wonka. "It won't stop till we're there. I hope no one else is using the other elevator at this moment." "What other elevator?" said Mrs. TV. "The one that goes the opposite way on the same track as this one," said Mr. Wonka. "Holy mackerel!" cried Mr. TV. "You mean we might have a collision?" "I've always been lucky so far," said Mr. Wonka. "Now I'm really going to be sick," said Mrs. TV. No, said Mr. Wonka. "Not now. We're almost there. Don't spoil my hat." The next moment, there were screeching of brakes and the elevator began to slow down. Then it stopped altogether. "Some ride," said Mr. TV, wiping his great sweaty hand with his handkerchief. "Never again," said Mrs. TV, and the doors of the elevator slid open, and Mr. Wonka said, "Just a minute now. Listen to me. I want everybody to be very careful in this room. There is dangerous stuff around in here, and you mustn't tamper with it." The TV family, together with Charlie and Grandpa Joe, stepped out of the elevator into a room so dazzling bright and dazzling white that they screwed up their eyes in pain and stopped walking. Mr. Wonka handed each of them a pair of dark glasses and said, "Put these on quick, and don't take them off in here. Whatever you do, the light could blind you." As soon as Charlie had his dark glasses on, he was able to look around in comfort. He saw a long, narrow room. The room was painted white all over, even the floor was white, and there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere. From the ceiling, huge lamps hung down and bathed the room in a brilliant, bright blue light. The room was completely bare except at far ends. At one of those ends, there was an enormous camera on wheels, and a whole army of Oompa Loompas were cluttering around it, oiling its joints and adjusting its knobs and polishing its great glass lens. The Oompa Loompas were all dressed in the most extraordinary way. They were wearing bright red spacesuits, complete with helmets and goggles. At least they looked like they were spacesuits, and they were working in complete silence. Watching them, Charlie experienced kind of a sense of danger. There was something dangerous about this whole business, and the Oompa Loompas knew it. There was no chattering or singing among here, and they moved out over the huge black camera slowly and carefully in their scarlet spacesuits. At the other end of the room, about 50 paces away from the camera, a single Oompa Loompa, also wearing a spacesuit, was sitting at a black table gazing at the screen of a very large television set. "Here we go," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down with excitement. "This is the testing room for my very latest and greatest invention, television chocolate." "But what is television chocolate?" asked Mike TV. "Oh, goodness, child, stop interrupting me," said Mr. Wonka. "It works by television. I don't like television myself. I suppose it's all right in small doses, but children never seem to be able to take it in small doses. They want to sit there all day long staring and staring at the screen." "That's me," said Mike TV. "Be quiet," said Mr. TV. "Thank you," said Mr. Wonka. "I shall now tell you how this amazing television set of mine works. But first of all, do you know how the ordinary television works? It is very simple. At one end, where the picture is being taken, you have a large movie camera and you start photographing something. The photographs are then split up into a million tiny little pieces, which are so small that you can't see them. And these little pieces shoot out into the sky by electricity. In the sky, they go whizzing and whizzing around all over the place until suddenly it hits an antenna on the roof of somebody's house. And then it goes flashing down the wire that leads right into the back of the television set. And in there, they get jiggled and joggled all around until every last single one of those millions and millions of pieces fit right back in its place, just like a jigsaw puzzle. And presto, the photograph appears on the screen." "That isn't exactly how it works," Mike TV said. "I'm a little deaf in my left ear," said Mr. Wonka. "You must forgive me if I don't hear everything you say." "I said it isn't exactly how it works," said Mike TV. "You're a nice boy," said Mr. Wonka, "but you talk too much. Now then, the very first time I saw an ordinary television working, I was struck by a tremendous idea. 'Look here,' I shouted, 'if these people can break a photograph into millions of pieces and send the pieces whizzing through the air and then put them together again on the other end, why can't I do the same thing with a bar of chocolate? Why can't I send a real bar of chocolate whizzing through the air in tiny pieces and then put the pieces together on the other end, all ready to be eaten?'" "Impossible," said Mike TV. "You think so?" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, watch this. I shall now send a bar of chocolate, of my very best chocolate, from one end of the room to the other by television. Get ready there. Bring in the chocolate." Immediately, 6 Oompa Loompas marched forward, carrying on their shoulders the most enormous bar of chocolate Charlie had ever seen. It was the size of a mattress that he slept on at home. "It has to be this big," Mr. Wonka explained, "because when you send anything by television, it always comes out much smaller than what it was when it went in. Even with the ordinary television, when you photograph a big man, he never comes out on your screen any taller than a pencil, does he? Here you go then. Get ready. No, stop. Hold everything. You there. Mike TV, stand back. You're too close to the camera. There are dangerous rays coming out of that thing. They could break you into a million pieces in 1 second. That's why Oompa Loompas are wearing spacesuits. The suits protect them. All right, that's better. Now then, switch on." One of the Oompa Loompas caught a hold of a large switch and pulled it down. There was a blinding flash. "The chocolate's gone," shouted Grandpa Joe, waving his arms. He was quite right. The whole enormous bar of chocolate had disappeared completely into thin air. "It's on its way," cried Mr. Wonka. It's now rushing through the air above our heads in millions of tiny pieces. Quick, come over here! And he dashed over to the other end of the room where the large television set was standing, and the others followed him. Watch the screen, he said. Here it comes, look! The screen flickered and lit. Then suddenly, a small bar of chocolate appeared in the middle of the screen. Take it, shouted Mr. Wonka, growing more and more excited. How do you take it? Asked Mike Teavee, laughing. It's just a picture on a television screen. Charlie Bucket, cried Mr. Wonka, you take it. Reach out and grab it. Charlie put out his hand and touched the screen. And suddenly, miraculously, the bar of chocolate came away in his fingers. He was so surprised he nearly dropped it. Eat it, shouted Mr. Wonka. Go on, eat it. It'll be delicious. It's the same bar. It just got smaller on the journey, that's all. It's absolutely fantastic, gasped Grandpa Joe. It's a miracle. Just imagine, cried Mr. Wonka, when I start using this across the country, you'll be sitting at home watching television, and suddenly a commercial will flash onto the screen and a voice will say, Eat Wonka's chocolates. They're the best in the world. If you don't believe us, try one for yourself. Now. And you just simply reach out and take one. How about it, eh? Terrific, cried Grandpa Joe. It will change the world. And we are done with chapter 26. I hope you're enjoying our story. We'll continue reading. Bye.